So I was always an experimenter, and quite naively I believed that if I do enough experiments, I'll figure out the world completely. So the hundreds of people I have counseled in my work life, professional life, as they go through a midlife crisis, they are all asking these questions, just that they are not asking these explicitly. Either they are very afraid or they are very busy. There are other demands that are more urgent.
You have compared Krishna with today's leader and why it's important for today's leader to be like Krishna.
Krishna is not stuck by anything. And the whole point of the Mahabharata is Bhishma was also a hero, but he was stuck by the oath that he had taken, and that was the defining point of his identity. Drona was also a very skilled hero, but he was stuck by the promise that he had made his student that you will be the best student in the world.
And the world is talking about that you should have a purpose. And right now, what we are talking about is the concept of fluidity. Thank you so much, sir. Such a pleasure having you here.
Same here, Gaurav.
In fact, I've been waiting to have this opportunity to interact with you because I continue to follow you on what you write on LinkedIn. It makes me take a pause and reflect on who I'm being in this moment. So there are so many questions I have that I'm going to ask you. Now, before we get into that, very curious to know if you could remember or recall a moment from your childhood days that brings a smile on your face today as well.
So I was always an experimenter, and quite naively I believed that if I do enough experiments, I'll figure out the world completely. So, for example, I have taken the old paste tubes that are coming in plastic these days. Earlier, they used to be in some form of a tin foil. So we used to sort of take out all the paste after it's done, then pump air through the cycle pump, then put water inside it, fill the stuff, put a hole, and underneath a group of stones, light some fire through leaves and other things, hoping that the steam will come out and it will flow like a rocket. And I remember about 10 times we have done an experiment like that. Thrice the tube has flown to some distance, and a very fantastic moment. Once it was just shaking around and didn't do anything. We substituted water with oil, did all sorts of stuff. So these kind of experiments that we did, trying to figure out the world, I think they bring a smile to me even today.
Trying to figure out the world that we live in. It sounds like an easy statement, and yet I personally believe it's a lifetime journey. It's a lifetime journey.
Yeah, it is a lifetime journey, and one at the end of which you may have nothing to show. So I think the key question is, are you still willing to take that journey? Are you still willing to go on that adventure? So that I think is the key question.
Yeah. Anand, very curious. You have written a couple of books, and one such book is Happiness at Work.
Right.
And what led you to write a book on happiness at work?
So the book is about people like all of us who go about their jobs, their professions, their careers, tackle the challenges of life. And I was trying to ask myself, from all the research that has happened in the world, right? The traditional wisdom or modern research, can we say something very tangible to all of us in terms of how to maximize our own sense of satisfaction with life? So that is the motivation behind the book. Because what use is all these subjects, whether psychology or philosophy or religion or this thing, if it doesn't answer the question of how to live well? So, and I was trying to answer that question in a way and communicate that answer in a way that all of us doing busy jobs and not with a big, huge background in the social sciences can still appreciate, relate to things and experiment and see whether it works or not. So that has been the motivation.
Yeah. So what does the research say? What are those factors that contribute to maximize happiness at work?
So I think if I have to look at overall life satisfaction, I think it's a multi-dimensional pursuit. So that's the first thing that I would say. One of the dimensions of that pursuit is how do you celebrate and become sensitive to a variety of positive emotions? So happiness is not, it's just one umbrella label. And when you double click it, it doesn't say anything much. So inside the word happiness is one hue called joy, another called hope, something called delight, something called pleasure, something called security, something called relief, right? There are something called love. So there are so many things when you double click the word happiness, which is like a common usage. That one dimension of it is how do we become sensitive to a lot of a variety of positive emotions. For example, can we be awed by something? Can we sit and wonder what is the likelihood that I sit here and think about my own life, and I sit here and think about the meaning of it all? What is the chance that something like that can happen? So are we open to such awe, for example, right? So that's amazement. So are we open to play? Would we like to explore, play, and see what comes out of it? So I think one dimension of it is how do we become sensitive to a variety of positive emotions so that the chance that we will be stimulated by one of them is higher, and therefore we have a higher sense of well-being. So that's one part of it. The second part of it has to do with, for example, a sense of mindfulness. How do we, when there are challenges thrown at us and which will inevitably happen, how do we create a space from which we are able to see these challenges instead of being swept away by them? How do we create some sort of a buffer zone between the stimulus out there and what should we do about it? So the second dimension of this is what I would call as mindfulness. If I take the third dimension, that is analysis. All of us, so I believe very strongly, so research says that human beings have the longest childhood as a proportion of their total lifespan. So we need caregivers for a long period of time in our lives compared to, let us say, a calf that comes out of a cow and within hours is able to walk. Or any other creature, mammal, any other vertebrate, they are all ready for life the moment they come out. We are not ready for life the moment we come out. And our brains grow outside the mother's womb. That is why they have been able to grow big. There's a chance that we will be killed at childbirth, at the instance of birth itself. So this also creates a very unique situation for us as human beings, because what then happens is we are dependent on caregivers in an extraordinary way. And when we are dependent on caregivers in an extraordinary way, we very early on in life tend to switch off what we ourselves think, want, feel, and tend to focus too much on what our caregivers want, think, and feel, and what will make them happy. And this extraordinary shift of denial of one's own fundamental psyche, its energy, the wellspring of whatever it causes the psyche, and try to look at what other people will want us to be like. To construct your own identity in terms of others introduces a sense of despair in all of us. And unless we come to terms with that despair and overcome it, one can't truly live well. So the third dimension of this is what you can call as analysis, to figure out what are our mobile phones default settings, right? Our own default settings. What do they predispose us to? And to start this complex journey of, you can't start just by introspection. Therefore, to start this, you try to ask, what is my stress profile like today? What are the external factors that are playing in my outer life that cause me to be unhappy? And what are the factors that, because of the way I am, my inner theater, that cause me to be unhappy? And how do I take these stress profile and very consciously try to work on it? Bringing research and then in a very science-based way, try to explore this question of how do you live better than how you are living today. So I think that's the sort of question and answer that I have tried to put forward in that book.
And very rare we take a pause and ask the question that you're asking, be it the higher sense of well-being or the concept of mindfulness. And what a beautiful analogy that you have shared, that I think, and you're right, I think human beings have the longest childhood. But at the same time, as you mentioned, about the denial of the fundamental energy, right? Now, what led you to get on this path of asking these intriguing questions from yourself? What was that moment in your life where you got inducted, you got initiated, and you started to walk on this path?
So I would say a lot of us ask these questions, though not very explicitly. So the hundreds of people I have counseled in my work life, professional life, as they go through a midlife crisis, they are all asking these questions, just that they are not asking these explicitly. They all wonder, right? So when we are young, we count up our age. One, when will I be two? When will I be three? When will I be 5, 18, 21, 25? So we count up. At some point, we begin to count down our life, right? Saying that how long do I have got to live? And when we start counting down is when we try to ask, okay, is whatever I did so far, could it have been any different? And since time is running out, what can I do with it? So all of us ask this, and that's why they come up with midlife crisis. People tend to feel a little rejected or lost. And like we were discussing earlier, a lot of mythologies, right, reflect this crisis. When Sri Ram went to the forest, he went lost in the wilderness, trying to discover what is very valuable to him. When the Pandavas went to the forest, they were also lost in the wilderness. So if you see midlife as a certain kind of trying to figure out what is it more important to me and where can it be found, by going into the forests of our lives, right, and being perplexed about all these questions is very natural to every human being. Only thing is that they don't ask that very explicitly. Either they are very afraid, or they are very busy, right, or there are other demands that are more urgent, so they continue to live in that denial. So everybody asks, but perhaps because my life was a little blessed, I had the affordability to ask that question. So that's one. But if you go back in childhood and say, what is it that triggered me to thoughts like this? I was very keen to understand the basis of our intelligence. What is it like to be us? And very early on, I read a bit of philosophy. And the reason I read those philosophies is not because I got really intrigued by these questions, because my father did his PhD in psychoanalysis. And just to feel important at those early ages, I used to figure out and read whatever that came to him. So a little bit of those questions got triggered and left there, not very well processed. And somewhere later, the whole mindset of trying to investigate how to figure out the world, what are we made of, what is the purpose, and these things came together when I was counseling lots of individuals who are doing very well and suddenly saying, I don't know whether I'm doing what I want to do. So a mixture of these two made me ask, okay, is there something tangible that can be said to all these individuals?
I can so much relate to that. And I think there's a very different adventure of self exploration when you start to ask these questions. Talking about mythology, you gave examples of Lord Rama, you gave Pandavas. In one of those posts recently that I read, where you have compared Krishna with today's leader and why it's important for today's leader to be like Krishna. What's your take? Why do you feel that ways?
So if you look at all these characters are celebrated as gods in the religious milieu that we live in. However, Krishna is called some sort of a Purna avatar. And if you look at Krishna is not stuck by anything. And the whole point of the Mahabharata is Bhishma was also a hero, but he was stuck by the oath that he had taken. And that was the defining point of his identity. Drona was also a very skilled hero, but he was stuck by the promise that he had made his student that you will be the best student in the world. And everything else ran around that. Or the fact that he wanted to make his son one of the foremost people and give him all that. So each of these individuals, because of the powerful experiences in their life, got stuck, right? And Yudhishthir at some point in his life decided that the life of truth, the life of honor is the most important. Everybody got frozen in the most significant moments of their life, and therefore their lives further revolved around those significant moments.
Identity.
That identity, right? The story they told themselves about themselves. If I have to use slightly elaborate this thing. Whereas Krishna was not stuck in any story. So he gave himself considerable freedom to be different people at different times. And therefore he was able to tackle the challenges of life much better than all these individuals. So I think that becomes a big thing, because see, a leader comes up in life because of what they have done. And therefore they are very much compelled by theory of reinforcement to continue to do what they have done. And sometimes that can outlive its utility, and they don't generally realize, because that's what have made them successful. But if you are appreciating the character of Krishna, how he never got stuck by any defining moment in his life, and therefore gave himself the flexibility to explore, to play, to respond in the most appropriate manner. And to also not take him very seriously. That's very important, right? And don't take yourself very seriously, because that itself can create a lot of hot buttons for your enemies to press. So Krishna never took himself seriously. So nobody could manipulate him that way. So in several ways, I think he's a very good metaphor if you want to look at leadership development and your own personal development as a journey to undertake.
Yeah. A few of the questions which are coming to me right now is, what are you getting stuck with in your life? I'm asking this question from myself. What am I getting stuck with in my life? And what would that be in case I'm willing to release that? Now, on
Right.
one hand, I know the moment I'm going to release that, I will be in an ocean which is unexplored yet for me. The universe is a possibility for me. But at the same time, there's some kind of fear as well, fear of unknown. Alan Watt talks about that at times, the moment we are getting stuck with our purpose as well, we still don't experience freedom because we are clinging on to purpose. So on
Right.
one hand, the world is talking about that you should have a purpose. And right now, what we are talking about is the concept of fluidity.
Right.
What is your take on the polarity and how can we hold these two together? Purpose on one hand and letting go of the identity or the story that you've been telling to yourself. Continue to release that.
Very hard question. I believe the philosophy of existentialism has tried to walk in the direction that you are saying of balancing purpose and freedom. So one of the things that they say is that your project or your purpose is something that you define. And at the end of the day, it may not be meaningful to anyone else, right? It is your own project and purpose. And all we have to constantly do is to take our freedom seriously, create a hierarchy of values for ourselves, and try to live our values without any exploring everything. And few years later, if you believe that these values have to be changed, you should be willing to change that and live all over again with whatever time that is left in the world. And they think that this is the human condition. And if this human condition are not deeply accepted by us and seized for all that it can offer, we will constantly be living very suboptimal lives. So that's the existentialists. They have said that yes, it's a painful dilemma. So
It
what you're
is.
saying is a painful dilemma, but there is no way out.
Mm.
That is the nature of living as a human being.
Yeah, yeah. This is as I'm just talking to you, as I'm just listening and reflecting, it's like going for a trek. It's like getting lost in wilderness. I remember our last conversation, Anand, where you mentioned that you have to get lost before you find yourself. So the exact words you use like this, you get lost before you find yourself.
Right.
Is there any connection to what we are talking about right now?
Yes, absolutely. So you have to be willing to get lost. And I would say that, and be aware of the possibility that you may never find yourself. So,
Oops,
yeah,
really?
yeah. See, because what is the underlying urge or underlying hope behind what we are saying? We will get lost and we will eventually, everything will be okay. That everything will be okay is some sort of a thing that we want to cling to. Can
Yeah.
we unpick ourselves from even that hope and still undertake that adventure? Right. So that is the question that we have to push ourselves on, because there are no guarantees. See, and whenever I see people doing developmental effort, right, they are looking for a guarantee. Okay, I go to a coach because I need a guarantee. I go to this because it's a guarantee. Other people are telling me I feel good, but then that is not taking the full juice of development. The full juice of development is, are you willing to jump even if there are no guarantees? Because deep inside you have this urge that usko dekhna chahiye, that one has to explore that. So that is the kind of overpowering curiosity which has to propel our journey, without any guarantees of that the end outcome will be great and everything will be all right, and without any of those comforts.
Wow. Somehow I've not been able to even comprehend what you're talking about. But I do understand what you're talking about. And I'm just wondering what part of me is not willing to comprehend. It's not that I cannot comprehend. I think a part of me is not willing to comprehend because of the fear. And as you mentioned, that for the longest period of time, because we are so much dependent on our caregivers, we start to live in that denial of that fundamental energy that I should show up the way they would want me, they expect me to show up. I have to do good career wise because that is what is expected from me from my parents. I need to take care of my family because that's what society is asking me to do. In this complete trip, what I don't realize is that I'm not being able to find my own self.
Absolutely.
And right now I'm asking, have I come across any one person in my life who lives his life from that space?
Right. Very good question you asked. I would rather seek a much more humble evidence of this. Instead of asking which person in the world lives like that today, I would
Can I be
ask
the one?
when did I grow rapidly? When did I change something from an undesirable state to a desirable state? Was it when I worked under some guarantees, or I decided, come what may, I'm going to do it, and therefore one fine day we did it? So one of the things I try to write about is when do we accomplish personal change? And if you ask your own life, when did I accomplish the biggest personal change? When I followed a methodology, when I had 10 people watching me, when I wrote it down, or one fine day I very silently but surely told myself, yeah, I will leave this and do it. So when people quit smoking, for example, and if you ask them, what was that moment they quit smoking? And what was it like? It was not a intense head banging, clenching, face contorting. It is not that kind of a resolution. That's a
Yeah.
very quiet resolution. So the resolution for change and the resolution for taking that adventure is not a dramatic, noisy, right, loud and everyone visible to everyone kind of resolution. It's a very quiet internal resolution to take that
Hmm.
adventure or to make that change. And if you look, and they are very mild affairs. They are not very hard pushes. They are very mild, gentle nudges that just take you very effortlessly into the right direction. And if you look
Hmm.
at your own life, and what are those moments, and what was your mindset like in those moments, and how can we create that openness in every
Wow.
moment that we live? So that I think
Wow.
is a very easy way to think about it. Otherwise, when we worship or search for heroes, we are once again denying ourselves the possibility that we can be one, because
Yeah.
we are creating a distance between what we ought to do.
Precisely.
So that's the
Precisely. And also, I think as we're talking about the hero worship, that's where we are creating huge distance between where we are and what we are aiming for. And the very fact that we are creating that hero worship, because there's a part of me who's still aching for recognition, right? And again, the
yes,
society would want to celebrate you. And the moment
right.
you go back to the society, you've lost it again. You've
Yes,
lost it again, right?
yes,
Because you are doing it for that recognition, then you are doing it for that name and the fame. Now, in considering in the corporate world that you have worked for over 25 years, Anand, how can we implement these? Let me use this word. How can we use this philosophy of continue to release your identity and come back home? Continue
right.
to release your identity and come back home. How can we implement this philosophy in the corporate arena when the corporate celebrates designations? When corporate celebrates your achievement, your drive, your control. How much are you driving results? What kind of funds are you able to raise? So,
Right.
the environment that we are talking about right now, as per my understanding, that does not support the philosophy that we are talking about.
Right, right. So how do we do that? And once again, we can only do it gently. It's not a program that we can launch. But
Yeah.
I think I would once again appeal to individuals and say, when were you at your best? What happened inside you when you were at your best?
Hmm.
When were you at your most fulfilled? What happened inside you when you were at your most fulfilled? When did you learn a lot? And what happened inside when you learned a lot? What did we cling to and what did we let go? And I think that appeal, if we are able to create that reflection and that appeal, I think it will be a wonderful thing. So I had such a aha moment when I conducted leadership development in my organization for some of the top leaders. And
Hmm.
somewhere midpoint. So I went to different individuals and all very accomplished people and had a very heart-to-heart conversation 15 years ago. I recollected very well, very vividly what each person said and how they revealed their true emotions and feelings as they were undertaking this journey. And what they felt, somebody said, you know what, in a person's life, only one major thing is possible. And after that one major thing is done, they will just repeat their story around that. It will be some slight essence of it. So there will be a part 2 of the movie and a part 3 of the movie, but part 1 is this their life's work. It's not possible to do two big life's work. I can't change myself anymore. I will forever be a supporting person, one other person said. And I can't help it. But I thought they were very powerful moments of awakening for these individuals themselves, because after they said it, they then asked themselves, really? Is it not possible to do a second big thing in life? Really? Is it not possible to give up that effect of that shock that I had in my life? So I think being very open and listening is very important. Often what we do in these things, Gaurav, is that Asim Taleb calls it as the bed of procrastinators. So Procrustes actually had a bed and he would lure travelers to be his guests. And after that, he would make them sit in the bed or lie down in the bed. And if the bed was too long, he would stretch them. And if the bed was too short, he would cut them such that they fit in the bed. So sometimes what happens is in our urge to be professional, we tend to create Procrustean beds that don't actually solve the problem. So we distort the problem and do what we want to do, or we either stretch the problem or shrink the problem to do what we want to do. So this, I think, when we are trying to help somebody else to grow, it is important to be having no bed.
Yeah, it's like welcoming somebody to that adventure.
Right.
And yesterday I was talking to another friend of mine. His name is Satish Shenoy, and he's an author of a book. He has completed 7 marathons in different continents, and I was talking to him, and he asked a beautiful question. He said, Gaurav, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And right now, what you are talking about is, when was the last time you indulge yourself into an adventure sport? Let me just use this term as sport. Because as you mentioned, the first time tried and tested, then let me just replicate it second time, third time, fourth time, because the fear is, what if instead of doing a romantic role, if I get into comedy role, what if people don't accept me and I get stuck with that one role that I've played in my life?
Just an interjection there. Actually, there is if you go to soccer and you get into that penalty situation where each team tries to kick and then the goalkeeper is the one who makes the wins or loses the match for the team. So what I found is that it makes sense for the goalkeeper not to dive right or not to dive left, because then he or she can cover the maximum area. And however, the ball comes so fast, right? And you may still miss it if you didn't dive right or left. People prefer to dive right or left and just miss it by a mile and reduce their chances of saving the goal compared to standing still, because if they stood still and they missed the goal, they will look stupid in the eyes of others. And therefore, professional soccer goalkeepers tend to dive right or left when it's not a good strategy, because they are worried about what others will think after the fact. Same thing you are saying, right? Instead of a romantic role, what if we become a piece of comedy?
Yeah. Yeah. In my life, I'm thinking that I consider myself as so, and if I'm not that so, and who am I without that so? And it could be a title, it could be a role that I have, it could be any label that I've added to my name, and which is a very dangerous situation, isn't it, Anand?
Yes,
it's like self-sabotaging. It's suicidal.
No, definitely. So, in fact, very early on as a child, I used to watch myself and say that I can be whatever I want. I used to think that it just doesn't matter. I can just wake up one day and be whatever I want to be. So, scientist, okay, poet, okay, tennis player, okay. So, everything is okay. So, that's how I thought. And as life went on and I had to not invest everywhere and really consolidate something and say, do what it is, I felt very sad internally. I was talking or asking myself, am I losing some sort of flexibility here to be whatever I want by getting committed to something, right? And then building everything around it. And this sort of urge that, am I narrowing myself in some form? and instead of keeping it open, is also what prompted me to explore a multidimensional life where I don't work 100% of the time. I'm not a professor 100% of the time, no, not a corporate executive 100% of the time, not a writer 100% of the time. But whatever is it that is very meaningful at that point, give yourself the freedom to pursue. And that's one of the reasons I created some sort of a portfolio life. And as luck would have it, it worked out very well. But that's one of the things behind it, because I somehow felt deeply that I'm closing myself, and that's not good. That's like dying.
Yeah. I remember my conversation with another gentleman called Ram. Ram is a senior leader from VMware. He spoke about portfolio life. And as I'm just talking to you, it's only re-emphasizing my belief on why it's so important to have the portfolio life. And as I'm just talking to you, I'm also realizing that how you spoke about having different priorities, different set of value cards for yourself, right? And one of the topmost value is freedom over recognition.
Right.
Freedom over
Right.
name and money. Because the moment I said I need recognition, I will get stuck with the tried and the tested method. However, if my value is freedom, I will be willing to explore the adventure of the world. I'll be more flexible and resilient and accepting what is rather than what the way things should be. This should be like that. It should be like this. Let me just explore what is. Anand, you also spoke about inner theater. Tell me more about that. And you use the word inner theater in context to the stress.
Right.
So if you can just throw more light on this.
Right. So inner theater is where our past actually has set our default settings, and therefore we usually react to the world like that. We have been wrong, therefore we are paranoid. So it's an example of how a past can condition us into a certain way of being, which may not be very appropriate. So in the inner theater, if you look at it, what is going on when no other external stimuli is present? Where are you inclined to dive, left or right or straight or back? Or that is what is inner theater. So, for example, uh, some of our inner theaters can be underlit by fear. For example, fear of something wrong happening to ourselves, or fear of something wrong happening to people we care about, our near and dear ones, or fear of falling short, not meeting our own goals. So the inner theater for us can be underlit by fear. So when it is underlit by fear and it is under the surface, but all pervasive, that is going to condition our responses to the world, and they are going to be suboptimal. Similarly, our inner theater can be underlit by something in the past, right? It can be past oriented, bitterness. Somebody wronged me, I feel bitter about it. Or regret, I should have taken that call, didn't take it. Or guilt, I failed to prevent this wrong from happening to this individual. Or inadvertently, I did something wrong to somebody else. So they can be underlit by the past oriented ghosts. They are called ghosts because they are not like very visible, but nevertheless, they move and shake you all the time. Or it can be underlit by approval related, right? For example, I could be bullied, or I could be ignored, or I could be stared at. And especially women face this, right? Being stared at, being objectified. My own inner theater could be underlit by any of these 9 stressors. 3 with respect to future fears, 3 with reference to past, guilt, bitterness, or regret, or 3 with reference to how my own dynamics with others unfold, whether I am stared at with unwanted attention, or whether I am ignored, or whether I am bullied. So figuring out like what is our inner theater underlit with can throw light on why are we helplessly behaving the way we are behaving, and can we reclaim our freedom, and what should we do to reclaim our freedom. So that is the idea of the inner theater.
Wow. Wow. As I'm just listening to you, when you spoke about bitterness, regret, or guilt, when you spoke about looking for approval, so when somebody is bullied or stalked at or ignored or objectified, or the future fear, I could actually see people in my life who are going through that.
Right.
Now, the difficult part is, Anand, once they have gone through that in the past, they tend to manifest the same thing again and again in their life. So rather than seeing things as they are, they look for validations for something that they have gone through, and because of which they are not only suffering alone, people around them are also suffering.
Right.
It's like you start to bite the hand which is trying to support you,
Right.
because you tend to see that hand as the hand coming from the past.
Right.
Now, in such kind of situations, what could be done to bring in? Eckhart Tolle has done a lot of work around this. What's your views on this? How can one release the victimhood of the past, the shadow of the past?
Right. So I'm not a trained psychoanalyst that way. So take my views as intellectual, not as a practitioner. Okay. So I must warn. So one, I think bringing awareness is in the individual is very important. And second is approving that individual unconditionally is important, because unless the individual feels accepted the way they are, they can't make, they don't have any space, a safe space from which to examine themselves. So creating a safe space and gently pointing out to them whether that is something that could be true about them, and allowing them to accept it at their own pace, I think can create some level of possibilities, right? Otherwise, it is pretty much shooting in the dark kind of situation. It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
difficult. And if they see someone, role models, right? People who have gone through that and are now dealing with things differently. And it has to be done in a very non-preachy kind of way. Because whenever somebody gets preached at, they feel further helpless. They feel that they are not agents anymore, right? They are objects, they are not agents. So the first principle is, how do you make them feel like agents again? And what does it mean to be an agent? And to celebrate the little victories that they have or obtain when they reclaim their agenthood in some form. All these are slow, but I think directionally right processes to get someone to overcome it.
I'm not going to label it slow or fast, because I think that's a label. But I think that's a way, because I think kindness and love can heal any of the wounds. That's such a relief. When you spoke about awareness, it might take a little longer time, and holding the safe space. And I'm just wondering, how can I bring awareness for all the shadows that I live from my past? It's not that only others have it. I have a lot of shadows that I live from. Can I create that safe space for myself? It's a long journey for sure. Very painful, I must tell you, Anand. Very, very painful.
It is. It is. And sometimes some people have tried to approach it intellectually by saying that, are we living life like a character in a novel? Or are we living our own life, right? Is there a script that we are following? How does that feel for us, that we are following a script and there is no meaning? Tomorrow this will happen. That's written in the story somewhere. So is that our life? And sometimes you may get a little disgusted by that thought and then say that I must reclaim my freedom now. And that nudge can do the trick. Sometimes when we are deeply hurt in some form, you definitely need somebody else to create that zone of compassion, that zone of love, from where, and zone of approval. It's not that I'm working on a project and if you don't grow, I will feel bad about it. Even that is bringing back the whole despair of a caregiver. So how can you care without giving the whole despair of a caregiver that they experience as a child? Is that trick?
Yeah. It's not only the caregiver is in the adventure. The caregiver is also inviting you to explore that adventure, where there's no confirmation.
Right.
There's no confirmation.
That's the big deal. There is no guarantee that it will all
There's
end
no
well.
guarantee.
There's no guarantee.
Yeah. Anand, wondering, you have been working in a technology company. So in the technology company, the context is very different. And what you are talking about is coming from a very different space.
Right.
How do leaders show up? How do so-called leaders, let me not use the word leaders, how do professionals in the technology space take what you're talking about? Is it easy for them to understand and interpret? Is it difficult? Do they bring in their intellectual argument? to counter what you're talking about?
So suppose I ask this question, right? Are you allowed to cry in the workplace?
Yeah,
You
as
say
simple as that.
yes, yes, no, whatever. But then generally it is believed that you don't cry in the workplace.
Yeah.
That's the sort of accepted norm. Similarly, can you have these conversations in the workplace? That itself is not an accepted norm. You say, no, that you do one on one, if you relate very well to the individual. So you have to take away those kind of matters, that you are under the banner of an organization, that you are a HR and someone else is a leader and all that. And if they feel like having those conversations and if it gives joy to them, then they do have those conversations. And one can see that they say a lot of things that are very profound and revealing. And they feel like sharing their vulnerabilities, they feel like sharing their dilemmas, they feel like sharing the fact that they are lost without a GPS, right? And that itself is a big deal. And those conversations and those things survive a lot of boundaries, organizational boundaries, location boundaries, many boundaries. And years later, they will say, you know what, that thing made me think. And that gives a lot of satisfaction, saying that thing you said, it made me think. And sometimes their mentees and their mentees say, you know what, we have heard the story about you from them, and we also thought that. So that's a great satisfaction, isn't it? That irrespective of all these, those conversations have a life and power of their own. And I may not exist, that person may not exist, but the story travels and changes people. So isn't it wonderful?
Wow. And story does not have any expectation that I would stop there or I will stop here. And that is the reason the story has been able to create the wonder that we've been talking about. Now, if each one of us is a story, and if we don't set boundaries around ourselves,
Right.
Just imagine the kind of travel and the adventure we can have in our lives and beyond. Anand, thank you so much for, as expected, an invigorating, thought-provoking, profound conversation, and for all the love and the care that you bring in every conversation. I'm genuinely humbled to have met you in this life. And thank you for who you are.
And all your questions were indeed very thought-provoking to me. And I wish in many more organizations, in many more families, these kind of conversations take place for all of us to grow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.